mind. In order to more efficiently manage any questions that you might have during today's session, we'll be using a program called the Slido. I'm actually going to transition to that particular screen right now. I'm just going to share my screen here. There we go. The link to the Slido will be posted momentarily in the chat by my co-host Davey. I'm just going to lead you through a quick tutorial. If you would like to submit a question, all the questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end of the session. So if you want to type in a question, use the question field here up at the top. If you want to remain anonymous, just leave this particular field blank. If you want your name to show, simply enter in your name before clicking on the green send button here to the right. At the end of the session, when we open up the Q&A, if you like a question or you see that your question has already been asked, simply click on the thumbs up icon that you see to the right here. And the moderator for today, Tony, will read through those questions during the Q&A. And with that, I would love to pass it over to the moderator for today's session, Tony Mark.
Well, welcome back, everybody. Thank you, Louis and Ascenda. I'm Tony Mark with the ASQ Vancouver Leadership Group. The session topic is how risk-based thinking can help to rethink opportunities. With Jayet Moon coming from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The purpose of this talk is to discuss the relevance of theory of emotional intelligence in risk-based decision-making while comparing various leadership styles. Research has consistently shown that emotionally mature leaders are more effective in delivering business results. The analysis in this talk expands upon available research on emotional intelligence and presents new theory which harmonizes leadership styles, emotional intelligence, and risk management. Recognizing the proven effectiveness of risk-based approaches to business decisions, the theoretical and practical linkages between emotional intelligence and situational risk management will be presented and discussed in detail with examples with specific focus on vicissitudes engendered by the pandemic and how to overcome them. Jayet is a senior member of ASQ who holds ASQ, CQE, CSQP, CQIA certifications. He's an expert in risk management and holds ERMCP, RIMS-CRMP certifications. He's a public speaker who has given various talks on risk management in the United States and the EU, and has a background in biomedical engineering. Here's a fun fact. He makes Nixie tube clocks in his spare time as a hobby, which I take it to be clocks made with old-fashioned vacuum tools. Is that cool, or are they hot? So he will present for 30 minutes, and we'll go over questions in Slido afterwards. So without any delay, over to you, Jayet.
Thank you. I will share my screen now. All right, are you able to see it?
Yes, all good.
All right. Hold on, just need to share my computer. All right. So thank you for joining me today. This talk is about risk-based thinking and how it can help rethink opportunities. And the word think is the key here. So we'll be talking a lot about thinking. And again, that's something which quality professionals don't often talk about, decision making, that is. So we'll go into a lot of detail on that. So I won't bore you with my introduction again. I just want to add that I'm also author of the book, Foundations of Quality Risk Management. It has fundamentals about risk management for beginners and experts. It's like a handbook or a textbook, if you will, But this presentation really goes beyond that. So, but I'll reference some of the concepts from there. But this presentation is more of a combination of organizational plus personal risk management, and then where does EI play a role in that? So I want to begin by sharing a video with you. The video is on the message of change and transformation, continual improvement. That's all. That's what we want. It's on transformation for growth, and it has a message for us on both personal and organizational level. So I'm gonna start, and if you guys cannot hear the sound, let me know, and I'll change the setting. But here we go.
No sound.
No sound, Jayet.
No sound? All right, let's start again.
And how we have to look at stress. Okay.
Okay, I hear something.
Okay, so I'm gonna start again.
The stress and how we have to look at stress. Okay. And I think it's an important thing because many people have told me from my lectures the one thing they remember. Okay. I was sitting in a dentist's office and looked at an article that said, "How do lobsters grow?" I don't care how lobsters grow, but I was interested in it. And it points out that a lobster is a soft, mushy animal that lives inside of a rigid shell. That rigid shell does not expand. Well, how can the lobster grow? Well, as the lobster grows, that shell becomes very confining. And the lobster feels itself under pressure and uncomfortable. It goes under a rock formation to protect itself from predatory fish, casts off the shell, and produces a new one. Well, eventually, that shell becomes very uncomfortable as it grows back under the rocks. And the lobster repeats this numerous times. The stimulus for the lobster to be able to grow is that it feels uncomfortable. Right? Now, if lobsters had doctors, they would never grow, because as soon as the lobster feels uncomfortable, goes to the doctor, gets a Valium, gets a Percocet, feels fine, never gets off its shell. So I think that we have to realize that times of stress are also times that are signals for growth. And if we use adversity properly, we can grow through adversity.
So I love that video. Change is important for the lobster to survive and grow. And, change is something we're all dealing with right now. And, as quality professionals, we deal with change every day, but now it has taken, a different proportion. And a good change is something that leads to growth on some bottom line. But you have to assess the time and opportunity for that transformation. And this is where risk management can help us a little bit, risk-based thinking. The pandemic, the way I see it, it's a time for transformation. It's opportunity for everybody. Most of you may know, W. Edward Deming wrote the book Out of Crisis in 1982 for North American industry, and the reason was that it was in a crisis back then, due to the fact that American companies started thinking that in the 50s and 60s that their products define quality, not the customer. And it doesn't mean that American industry was static at that time, but the customer focus was not central to improvement. And if you talk about Toyota, the secret to success for them is simple. You do everything what you want to, you do your continual improvement and whatever, but you do that with a strong customer and people focus. Now in COVID, a lot of customer expectations have changed. In some industries, they've changed a lot, and in other industries, a little bit. But there's a little bit of a shakeup everywhere. A company that does not innovate, does not transform, does not grasp opportunities in accordance with these new expectations is bound to fail. So to truly understand these expectations, we have to understand the system. And, I'll bring up W. Edwards Deming again, because he was one of the first quality thought leaders who explicitly, showed systems thinking with a quality focus. And, and he said, the understanding of various parts of the system and their interlinkages has to be obtained so that we have sufficient context to predict the system and then system behavior. And when you get that, then successful innovation and transformation can occur. So all well and good. So what's the issue here? What stops us from achieving our plans for change, for transformation? And Deming again, he said, management is prediction. Right, so what messes up our predictions? It's the simple fact that we don't appreciate uncertainty. And what's within uncertainty? It's risk. Again, to draw a parallel, Deming said, appreciate the system. You gotta appreciate and understand the uncertainty within which the system operates to have any value to your predictions. Now, ISO 31000 defines risk as effect of uncertainty on objectives. A person reached out to me a couple of weeks ago, and she owns her own consulting firm, and she said, Jayet, I read your book. You define quality, you define risk, but what is quality risk? And I told her it's simple. It is the effect of uncertainty on quality objectives. It's as simple as that. And where does quality operate? Within the organization and associate uncertainty. And this uncertainty will carry threats and opportunities. Just like for the lobster sheds the skin and is so vulnerable, but at the same time, it's a threat and an opportunity for the lobster. The opportunity is to grow, and the threat is it doesn't have its defense mechanism anymore, and fishes can eat it, bacteria or other infections can happen. So what the lobster story tells us is that any sort of change is a transformative process which is rife with uncertainty. I want to just take some time to go over some very fundamental concepts of risk, and will not take a lot of time here, but it's very important to understand on the very foundational level what is risk composed of and what does risk mean. So let's go back to the beginning, literally. So as humans, we're natural risk takers. We are all pioneers who seek to conquer uncharted territory, right? The bad news is that risk taking is a gift of natural selection. It takes a brute force approach to evolution and exposes us to a lot of mistakes. So for example, this caveman on the left, he could choose to trust his gut and enter an unknown dark cave. Another caveman could choose to wait in the bush for a few hours, check if the cave already housed a saber-toothed tiger within it. And we might find the confident and gutsy caveman who just traipses into the cave very daring. But in case there in fact did happen to be a tiger in the cave, we would have to admire the other caveman's level-headedness. So the factor which differentiates gut-based thinking and risk-based thinking is the human attitude towards uncertainty. Now, uncertainty, Cambridge English Dictionary, it just defines it as a situation where something is not known. So, the next important realization to develop risk-based thinking is that by default, the probability of an uncertain event is unknown, and the risk of an uncertain event is unknown as well. However, if based on objective information, we decide to assign probability to a previously uncertain event, then we can ascribe risk to an event. And probability is the level of possibility of something happening or being true, or in maths, it represents a number of how likely it is that a particular thing will happen. Now, I have an example here. I'm sorry, the slide is a little bit off here, but we see what we want to see. So if you look at the history of probability, all of it goes back to dice games. So I have a dice example for you. Consider all of you are players in this game, and 2 dice are rolled, and you're supposed to guess what is the sum of the 2 numbers. And if you guess it right, you double your money. And if you guess it wrong, you lose your money. So, 2 people are playing this game. One is a gut-based thinker, other one is a risk-based thinker. The gut-based thinker chooses numbers based on, his girlfriend's birthday, or, a father's birthday or something like that, right? You know, this is my lucky number. A risk-based thinker is going to use science. You know, he or she might make this chart on the right, and when you scientifically analyze all the outcomes, you will see the possibility of number 7 happening is the most. The probability is like 1/6 of the time, right? So this person is going to choose number 7. And you know, I did the math on the left, like how many times do I have to choose number 7 to, you know, to increase my probability of winning? And by the time you get to 13 times, there's a 90% chance that you will win this game. So basically, and by the way, if you want to look into this particular example, you know, not to encourage gambling or anything, but this is called the martingale betting system. You can Google it and learn more about it. But anyways, all a risk-based approach means is to have a science behind your decision, a science which usually encompasses probability and consequence. Now let's look at a little bit of a personal side of it. So Daniel Kahneman did a lot of research starting from the 80s, and he says there's two systems of thinking in the human brain. You know, one is system 1, which is fast, unconscious, it's for quick everyday decisions, and the other one is system 2, which is slow, conscious, effortful. It's for complex decisions. And if you look into this more, various parts of the brain, there are different parts of the brain which are involved in processing these decisions. And when you talk about gut-based decisions, that is system 1. You're just quickly doing it. And when you talk about risk-based decisions, those are slow, complex, effortful, deliberate. That is system 2. So as quality professionals, when we are faced with problems, we should attempt to, to engender system 2 thinking. That doesn't happen every time, but just being aware of that fact, goes a long way. And we'll speak a lot more about this. So naturalistic decision making is something which the U.S. Army did a lot of research on. And what this philosophy is that it tries to study how do humans make fast decisions when you don't have a lot of time, like how do you actually, come to a conclusion. And the whole concept, really, the conclusion is that we don't objectively consider different decision paths. If we are faced with uncertainty, we will try to, based on our emotions, biases, things like that, we'll try to fit that into a previous uncertainty, which was similar, previous situation with similar sorts of facts and data and markers, which was similar. And based on that, we'll check in, okay, 1 or 2 decision paths, and then we'll go ahead and take those. So, it is 90% of this is based on system 1 interaction of brain and information around uncertainty and its nature. So what I did was I took this model and simplified it in terms of concepts we can relate to. So basically you have uncertainty, and there are some facts around it. And then based on that, you process it in your brain, and your emotions, biases, heuristics, all of those things, help form that decision. And you simulate that. You simulate in your brain, okay, this might happen. And you will never get all the facts, right? Whenever you have to make tough decisions, you'll never get all the facts. So you'll try to fill that with assumptions, which may or may not be true. And based on that, there will be a perception of risk. And based on that risk perception, you will adopt a subconscious risk attitude. And that will really decide what kind of decision you'll take. And we'll get back to this. But I want to take a few steps back, a lot of steps back actually. And let's go from personal to organization. And, Dr. Joseph Juran, his book on Juran on quality leadership, he talks at length about strategic quality management. And, and he's the father of strategic quality management, something which really is not even mature until today. And he gave more or less the pyramid on the left, which talks about hierarchies, strategic, operational, and then your product, service, process. And your risk is nothing but the effect of uncertainty on these objectives at all these levels. And that can be drawn out a little bit. So the diagram on the right is from my book. And I call it out as, okay, what are your risks to your strategic goals? What are risks to operational goals? What are risks to product, service, or process goals? And that is basically what is the effect of uncertainty on these particular things. The way we try to assess risk is by predicting it, and a lot of that is done using consequence analysis. So consequence analysis is to identify risk and their effects. And any undertaking which changes a process, we're operating under a lot of uncertainty. And this is related to the people, the machine, equipment, patients, environment, all those sort of things. So what is the consequence of your change? And every change has risks. So how are you assessing it and how are you managing it? So this is, this is a general concept when, what people kind of, go through it. And my book talks at length about how to assess risk and how to evaluate it and things like that. But, when you look at it from a system standpoint, when you go back to Deming, so what really is risk management? So it's really much more than calculation of probability and severity. It's about understanding the system. It's about understanding the uncertainties surrounding the system, and which include the people. That's a big factor of that. And then you talk about probability and impact of these uncertainties on the system, and then you prepare and respond to various kinds of systemic and non-systemic variation. And then finally you monitor and review, and you adjust the responses according to what you see as your system goes through time. And it's not really that difficult, and it's not a new concept. So this diagram on the right, I got that from Out of the Crisis, which is Deming's book. And he identifies 3 corners of quality, which is your product and service. And second one is your user, use cases, usability, perception, and product perception, current and in the future. And then he looks at customer expectation, which is defined by your products and the competitors' products. And then, USPs and value propositions, right? The threats and opportunities to all these 3 corners, that's your systemic risk management. That's, that's pretty much it. It's not that difficult to define. So when people say, what is a risk resilient system? And it's really, like, what do we do to build a risk resilient system? For example, okay, we have had COVID now, that's an external event, that's not something I could prepare for. So I think it's important to understand here that risk resiliency is internal. It is not external. So once you understand your system in its entirety, along with interconnections of components and everything, and once you understand your variation of your system by identifying where that is happening and which are the value creating and value sustaining parts, and assessing the stability of that, then you can bolster your system and critical components by introducing redundancies and things like that at places, so that anything which comes from outside, which actually challenges your system stability, you can repel that that shock. And the diagram on the right, again, this was presented by Deming in 1952, Japanese Union of Scientists and Engineers. And this diagram was really what many people say set off the Japanese Revolution. And it appears to be a very simple diagram, but the only thing this accomplishes is that it shows that the system is a loop. Like, one thing affects everything. And when you start thinking systemically, like a lot of Japanese started doing back in the 50s, you start automatically building resilient systems. So, Deming suggests appreciating the value creating and sustaining components of the system is the first step in profound knowledge. And there are threats and opportunities present within the system, which not only apply to these 2 components, but are also present in the interconnections of components. So, in today's world, that means evaluating what your system is, what is its stable state, who are the actors, who are the prime movers, who's helping the value creating and sustaining components, who is hurting them, what are the risks to system stability, both on holistic system level and component level. and how can the system be adapted to reduce threats and increase opportunities. And this requires evaluating every component, its interface, and other components in their risk environment. And if your system is stable, you can predict it. Variation can still be present in a stable system, but that's going to be a common cause variation. The special cause variation will challenge us to review the capability and capacity of the system. So, COVID-19 was an external shock that put many systems into states of special cause variation, right? So what does risk management mean in that context? What does risk-based thinking mean? It means regaining the stability of your system using an appropriate risk response. It means the new stability might be different in terms of capability, capacity, and variation from the old stable state. And we need to understand this difference and its causes and drivers. Now, based on this, we predict and innovate being fully cognizant of this new risk paradigm. And we ensure that innovation leads to new and desired stable state. So, that's basically, from a system standpoint, what risk-based thinking might mean today, right? So, and then we come to the theory of knowledge. So we are in industry 4.0, quality 4.0. Data and information is everywhere, but knowledge is just as scant, right? Because information is not knowledge. Information can be processed and converted to knowledge, but it's not knowledge at its face value. So, in a risk-based approach, we look at this Deming's tenet as an attempt to gain knowledge about the uncertainty. Management is prediction, he said, and so is risk management. But what does risk management does is that it allows us to increase the rationality of this prediction by providing us with a science to make sense of uncertainty. By using probability theory, occurrence likelihood of events can be scientifically predicted. So, in epistemological terms, right? It also asks us to question the validity of each prediction, and then remove subjectivity by repeated revisions based on incoming observations as the system moves through time. And then finally, we come to psychology, and now I'm going to shift again to the personal aspect of risk. Deming, when he wrote, he talked about understanding people and their interactions with other people and things like that. And it's true. People are the greatest source of variation, or the source of greatest variation. And they're the smallest, but the most active and the most important unit in the system. And motivations of people, which inform their decisions, can make or break a system. And Deming spoke at large about intrinsic and extrinsic motivations, but for a business which is trying to understand its risk to its survivals, it really needs to look at the decision making, both on the customer side and also on its employee side. And one of the first places to start doing that, that brings us to risk attitudes. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on the definition of these things, but the attitude of the decision maker is very important. Every time you go do a project or make a change, are you taking full advantage of the opportunity? Depends on what kind of attitude you have towards this uncertainty. Are you very, risk averse? Are you not gonna, go ahead and take a chance on things? Or are you very risk seeking? You're gonna go ahead and, bet your whole company on something, So it's really important none of these things are wrong, but it's important to understand the context within which the decision is being made and be aware of all of these things. And that brings us to, decision making and how we can merge all of these concepts together. So the model on the right is really my take on what a personal risk-based decision process, which includes risk attitude, looks like. So we take a step back, right? Step number one, take a step back, stop, get out of that system one system one frame, and try to go to the system two frame. And I call it an analytical pause right there. So be aware of any negative and positive emotions in your mind as a result of this uncertain situation. Number two, we need to regulate impulsive behavior, which happens due to strong emotions. And we do that by using some emotional intelligence and specifically self-regulation piece of it. At the same time, we try to identify and challenge any implicit or explicit biases. And then social awareness will help form a situational awareness in the context in which the decision is expected. And then after the personal part is over, we analyze the situation again and try to gain more understanding of the uncertainty. For example, if you need more facts, don't assume some things, go ahead and make that effort to get more facts, try to remove those assumptions. And then as we move forward, we identify the threats and opportunities related to the decision. And this is more of your risk identification phase. And then we, from the previously, we had a subconscious risk attitude. Now we have a conscious risk attitude. So we analyze various decision paths, classify them according to the risk attitudes, and then choose the right path, whether you want to pursue, retain, take, or turn away from the risk. Now, this is not going to be perfect every time, but at least being aware of these things, and I found that it helped me a lot. Being aware of these things make you realize, even on small personal tasks, right? Okay, this is my attitude towards this. Is that the right attitude? So it's something to be mindful of. So transformation is needed to capitalize on opportunities. Russell Lakoff, he was a very renowned system thinker, and he said, "Nothing provides a greater impetus for a change than a crisis. And overcoming a crisis requires, it requires grit, patience, flexibility, and adaptability, and it requires innovation. And risk-based thinking can greatly help from an organizational and personal perspective in scoping threats and opportunities, not only as you are trying to move forward with your organizational system, but also help with risk responses and risk treatment, and being proactive. And especially decision makers should be very careful in face of a risk like COVID-19, which affects both personal and professional lives, where a risk response may be more prone to biases and emotional undercurrents. So a risk intelligent decision there is the one which is driven by an appropriate risk attitude, informed by realistic risk perception, which in turn is formulated by emotionally intelligent thought that minimizes bias to most objectively meet and match the risk of reality to its mental perception. And this will result in a risk response, which leads to minimization of loss and maximization of opportunity. And this is my penultimate summary slide. The flowchart on the left, that you'll see in a lot of books, textbooks, it's in my book. This is your organizational process. It's an ISO standards. That's where you're at. That's what's expected from a standard, from a process standpoint. The decision-making model, we don't talk about. Now, this may not be the perfect decision-making model, but it is a decision-making model. And in quality profession, we don't really pay too much attention to that. U.S. Army and other consultancy firms like Big Three, they have been talking about this for a long time, but that's something we need to start being more cognizant about. And all of that comes together, in your hierarchical risk framework, because we need to understand that quality operates at different levels. You're going to get risk at different levels, but at the end of the day, it's going to be people who are going to be making decisions about those risks. So we need to be very cognizant of that fact as well. And that's been my time. Thank you very much. And we can take some questions now if we have more time. And my email is right here. I'm not a consultant. I'm just a learner. So, I'm just a student of risk management and quality. So if you want to reach out to me, discuss some of these concepts, want to read some of the stuff I do, you can shoot me an email and I'll reach out to you for sure.
Thank you, Jayet, for your talk. Well, we'll be looking at questions in Slido. Please submit your questions in Slido. I did have a comment. I was like, I'm very familiar with Kahneman's book on fast and slow thinking, and in what you often say is about thinking about understanding and appreciating systems, but we're so biased, and like there's a lot of racial unrest around the world. We're powerfully biased against things. How can we get management to think, and how do you overcome those biases that are very internal and very strong, and then and try and convince them to be more systematic, sit down, understand the system, but everybody wants to jump to a solution.
Right, right. And that is 100% true. And I mentioned the naturalistic decision-making model, and that was given by a person called Gary Klein. He was a very famous researcher, and he wrote a book, and it was on intuitive thinking. And he said, and he did a lot of research with the armed forces, and he said 90% of our decisions are gut-based. Like, people don't really take the time to think things through. And the way I personally, there might be many ways to deal with it. The way I personally deal with it is that, number one, I try to stimulate what the person I'm trying to convince, what they might be thinking while they're trying to make a decision through the data which I'm supposed to give them, right? So you need to stimulate that. So and a lot of it is like, so the challenge here is pulling the person away from subjectiveness towards objectiveness, right? And the only way we can do that is by showing some objective evidence. And that, in quality world, a lot of that means data. And if your data is actually black and white, a lot of people will try to question that. And the second thing I found useful was, I would literally use terms like these. Okay, so you are being risk averse to this. And then the people would take a step back and, you know what, Jayet? Yeah, I am being risk averse because of these things. And, so data and awareness of these things goes a long way.
Okay, let's look at the questions that we have here. How do you measure emotional intelligence, and is it related to regular intelligence measured by IQ test?
Well, you can say it might be related, but the way I look at it is it's slightly separate. IQ test is different, and EQ is different. Emotional intelligence, there's various tests to measure this. I don't know if there's a standardized test for EQ yet, but Daniel Goleman is the person who has done a lot of work on emotional quotient and emotional intelligence. So I believe he might have something on his website. But as far as I understand it, that's something which is very difficult to measure. I don't see that as a quotient or a number for people to improve or things like that. I see that as a tool for us to continuously measure ourselves against, and on a personal level, go to the next level.
Next question, risk-based thinking is not well understood in Canadian manufacturing. What are your thoughts? Well, you're calling from Philadelphia, so I'm not sure if you understand. Maybe you can put a in perspective in manufacturing in your area.
Yeah. So I think risk-based thinking, the word, became popular in 2015, right? After ISO 9001 introduced it. And there was a lot of confusion there. Oh my God, what's going to be risk-based thinking? Like, is it full-on risk management? What is it about? Do we do FMEAs? What is it exactly? And I remember the confusion which happened in the past, and ISO really didn't want to, impose a risk management framework on top of quality. So that's why they went with the words risk-based thinking. And when somebody says, risk-based thinking is not well understood, or I don't understand it, the truth is you're taking risk-based decisions every day. You just don't have that framework on paper. You don't have that flow chart I showed on the left. But even in the pandemic like this, if you go out to get groceries, that's a risk-based decision. It's a lot of risk going out, right? But you're taking that. So similarly, in your company, there's a lot at various levels. As I said, the CEO is taking risk-based. It's all in his or her mind right now. But the challenge is how to transfer that to paper, right? So that is something, not just Canada, everybody does struggle with that.
Okay, bringing back to home the COVID risk and COVID around us. The COVID risk was very underestimated, and it's materialized now. We should respond quickly, or how could you expect response plans. I don't. Do you have a view on how COVID risk is being managed? Maybe in Philadelphia.
Yeah. I don't have that much idea about Canada though, but COVID is a really good, it's an interesting one. And in my book, I actually have a whole chapter dedicated to pandemic and epidemic risk management. And that chapter got a lot of good reviews. And it's a very, I can't answer that question in the time I have, but it's an amazing discussion. And I wish you check that chapter out and reach out to me if you have any questions after that.
So Jay, if you could, you can put in chat any links you want or materials if you have a bit of time. But let's move on to the next question. We only have a few minutes. How much influence personal bias of senior management has on the risk of organization? I guess like my first comment about, unconscious bias.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's the same answer. By the way, I just shared one article I wrote for the Australian Journal of Quality. I think all of you should have it. And it's basically a lot of it is, what I just spoke about is in there. And it also talks about COVID. It also talks about risk resiliency, and it talks of it from a customer focused standpoint with a risk lens. So do check it out.
Okay, should we move on to another question? We all say risk and opportunities, but totally forget on opportunities and only focus on what can go wrong. So yes, everybody's worried about the bad outcomes.
Yeah, and that is true, and that stems from the fact that risk is generally viewed as negative, and even some of the dictionary definitions, they call out risk. They used to call out risk something as negative, but if you look at the newer dictionary definitions, I was just checking Oxford and Cambridge, they say the possibility of something bad happening. So there's that, you have your probability and impact. You have both the things there. So when people generally say risk in common parlance, they usually think of it as negative. But when you think of it in terms of, okay, I have this uncertainty and I have this risk, then, for example, coming back to the grocery store example, if you want to avoid that risk, right, you stay at home and stay hungry. But you have an opportunity to go out and get your groceries. So you will walk into that uncertainty to get something out of it. And getting something out of it, that's taking, that's leveraging the opportunity. So it's really as simple as that. It's two sides to the same coin, but just, common culture has just put such a negative twist on that. And would just like to clarify that according to the levels of the organization, things change. So for example, I've done a lot of product FMEAs and things like that as a quality professional, right? Opportunity at that level doesn't mean much. At that point, if I'm making something like a medical device, I want to avoid risk. But as you grow on a strategic level, right, you might get chances to leverage opportunities. So, it also depends on the level of thinking.
Okay, we'll have one more question. We're coming to the end of our time. In a service organization, how do you manage the planning risks versus the operational risks? I'm not sure, Shawit, how they'll split that up, but maybe have any comments on like planning versus the actual operation.
Yeah,
I don't know if there's a risk in planning.
Yeah. And when you're talking about planning, I might interpret that as something on an enterprise level or something on a strategic level. So how do you differentiate between that and operation? I interpret that as something which is day-to-day routine. And again, if you go back to the levels, so the question is, how do you manage these things? So operational is your routine day-to-day that has to be done by the operations folks. They have to be front and center in doing that. When you talk about planning and when you talk about long-term, when you talk about things which include strategy, that is where things like SWOT analysis and all those things come up. And that is where you get chances to leverage opportunities. But for all of that to happen, your operations should be running smoothly. You should have a tap on that. And then your product process service risk management should also be there and be a part of everything. So I see these things as a hierarchy, and that is helpful sometimes.
Okay. Thank you very much for your risk management talk. If you have any more links, you can put them in the chat. And we'll be submitting materials later after the conference. So thank you very much, Jayet, and back to Louis and Ascenda.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony. And thank you all for attending this session. We truly hope you enjoyed it. So we would love to hear your feedback on this presentation. And by doing so, I'm going to be posting and launching a quick viewer poll. Okay, I'm launching it right now, and I'm going to put that up for about 30 seconds. So please take a few seconds and let us know your reactions to this presentation. And while I'm doing that, I would just like to draw everyone's attention to the chat where I have put my co-host, Davey, has posted the link to the final session for not only today, but for the entire conference itself. So we truly hope you can join that one as well. Again, that link is in the chat function. Well, I actually will copy it again and repost it so that it's right at the bottom there. Okay. And there you have it. Okay, great. So with that, I'm going to end the poll. Thank you all for those who submitted your answers. Again, the link for the following session and the final session for today and for the conference itself is posted in the chat. And I thank you once again. Thank you to Tony, and thank you most of all to Jayet Moon for this engaging presentation. See you all in the next session.